Hi, Emily. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Thomas. So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, can you tell us more about yourself? Can you tell us your story? How you end up taking psychiatric medications? Basically, what's your story?
Yes, absolutely. Um, so my story is a bit convoluted just in the way that, sometimes the timelines kind of get all warped up, like in my mind, just because it's been, I've developed psychiatric condition so early in my life. I was 15,
Mhm.
and only later on I kind of gained perspective on what caused some of these things. But basically, I was just this really happy and healthy child, really happy teenager. Like I constantly remember thinking, when I was younger, I'm like, oh, this has been the best year of my life. And another week would go by, I'm like, no, this has been the best year of my life. Like I was just really, yeah, just very happy social person. And then when I turned 15, I what happened was what I call like it's a perfect storm of things that happened to me that kind of let me my mental health take a turn. And that's about the time where like a lot of girls are pushed to birth control, and I was one of them. And I think I had a boyfriend at the time, and there were no other conversations about any other sorts of options. It was just like you take birth control. Um, I also had some acne. So like, yeah, birth control is the miracle pill, right? So that was, like the first line of action once I visited the OBGYN for the first time. Um, that's also the age where I got the HPV vaccine and Gardasil, which now I know there's a potential of very serious side effects, especially with, heavy metal and some of the other adjuvants that it contains. And then I also, at that same age, started allergy shot treatment, which is just basically a series of vaccines that you take in a very short period of time. So for the first month, I took one shot a week, and then one shot a month for however many years. I don't even remember how long,
Mhm.
but it was within that first month of when all of these things kind of started at the same time. And also, I was living in Rio de Janeiro, which is a very dangerous city in Brazil, and you kind of just collect traumatic events. There's a big civil war that happens in Rio, and you just are part of it. So there were, physical and, psychological reasons why within a very short period of time, I just developed a handful of psychiatric conditions. Um, Now I understand, it's pretty much a lot due to heavy metal poisoning due to all these different shots that have aluminum adjuvant in them. And I've always been super skinny. So like the fattiest part of my body is my brain. So your body tries to isolate these toxins and just went all to my brain. And so then I developed panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, derealization, depersonalization, agoraphobia, claustrophobia. I was diagnosed with all these PTSD. I was just piling up diagnosis. And obviously, if you look at a healthy teenager one day and then without making the links, yeah, this healthy teenager the next week or next month is completely turned around into took a turn for the worse. The without making these connections, you just think, oh, she has some sort of psychiatric condition. And um and at that time I went to a psychologist. I helped somewhat. I remember we had a lot of conversations, so I logically and mentally started to understand a lot, but physically still like feeling all of these symptoms. And I suffered with all of that for many years up until about I was 23 years old.
So, what do you think triggered those symptoms?
So I think it was all that combination of everything I just talked about, like
Okay,
the shots and
like all
the
together.
trauma. Yeah, I think it was all together. I think it's mainly due to like the heavy metal accumulation, like on my brain, in my brain. So yeah. So then I had I remember at that time starting a medication. I can't remember what it was, but
Mhm.
I had like serious GI side effects from just taking it. So I remember stopping it. My mom was against it. Everyone was trying to convince that that's what I needed, but I didn't take it at the time. I did that trial. I didn't take it at the time. And it was until a few years later, when I had moved to the United States, that I was just, adjusting to a new culture, just had a breakup, I moved somewhere new, and I was again, in like very serious anxiety. Um, all these different like coping mechanisms that I developed as a side effect of, the physical assault and mental assault that I had when I was 15. Um, then I've never worked through them, I just kind of like developed really, uh, like not very good coping mechanisms. So I would dissociate a lot. I was dissociated 24/7.
Mhm.
I had a lot of depersonalization, derealization. That was basically how my body learned to cope with all that trauma. And and then I started. So then I was when I was 23. That's my doctor said, he's like, you have a chemical imbalance in your brain, and that's why you feel the way you do. I can't test you for it. There's no test for it. I go by your symptoms.
Yeah. It was in
And
Brazil or in US?
he was in Brazil,
Okay.
yeah, at that time. I was living in US, but I was seeing this doctor in Brazil. And he's like, you need Lexapro. We'll do a trial for 6 months, and then we'll consider taking you off of it. So I was like, okay, this is, sounds better than what I'm experiencing. So I'll go with it. I remember at that time asking him, like, what if I want to come off? Like, I really don't want to take something for the rest of my life. He was like, well, we'll talk about it in 6 months.
Mm.
And, uh, and that's what I did. And then for 6 months, I did feel better. I did, benefit from Lexapro. I was taking Lexapro 10 milligrams. And, um, and
How
I was
did
like,
you feel on Lexapro? How did it make you feel when you were?
I would just took the edge off. I was less anxious. I was experiencing less dissociation
Mm-hmm.
from just being less anxious. And I distinctly remember one time like, oh, okay, I'm feeling better. Like I'm feeling more social. Like I want to be around people.
Okay.
And yeah, and in about 6 months, I started to realize that like a lot of my anxiety symptoms were returning. Some of them, had alleviated, but they were not completely gone, and I just started to rapidly gain weight.
Mm-hmm.
My skin started to turn. I started to have these like very scary nighttime palpitations. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking like my I was having a heart attack.
Okay. And it
Um,
was still on 10 milligrams. You didn't change dose. You didn't do any changes in the dosages. You didn't try to quit back then.
so when I started realizing that like okay, I'm back to where I was. Some of these things are not gone. Some of these things have worsened, especially physically. I'm like I'm gonna try to come off, and then so the advice I got is like, okay, you half it. I was taking 10 milligrams, like you half it for 2 weeks, and then you half it again for 2 more weeks, and you stop. And I tried doing that, and then obviously I had horrible withdrawals. So about 1 year in, with Lexapro, I started to quit, and I would. The classic thing, you withdraw, you get the wrong tapering advice, you enter withdraw, the doctor says you're having a relapse, you
Yeah,
go
real
back on the
strength.
drug. So I was taking Lexapro for 6 years without it really working because I was withdrawing and stuck on this loop, of not understanding that what was going on was withdrawal and not relapse. And so I was basically taking it to maintain homeostasis, just not to withdraw. I wasn't taking it because it was benefiting me for
Okay.
six
So how did
years.
the reinstated make you feel? Did you crash from it? Did you had kindling effect, or was it make you like more stable? Or
And I honestly like I once I reinstated, the symptoms are gone. So that's why I believed like, okay, I'm better. But then I started to, on my own, very slowly reduce. So over like those 6 years, I started to, slowly reduce to, when I say slowly, I was just cutting pills in half. I wasn't really doing hyperbolic.
okay.
So I was able to get from 10 to 2.5, no problem, just
Mhm.
using the commercially available pills.
Yeah.
So basically halving the 10 and then halving the
Yeah.
5. So for many years, I want to say for 2 or 3 years, I was on 2.5 and I was doing okay. But everywhere, any doctors, and then at that point, I started consulting with psychiatrists in the US as well and like getting information online. And everywhere I read, it was like, okay, 2.5 was what they called the baby dose of Lexapro. You're like in such
Mm.
a subclinical dose, you can just stop, right? Um, and and that's what I tried to do many times, and I would
That's bullshit
withdraw.
because even though the dose is very tiny, the receptor binding is quite strong even in the subclinical dosages. So
Exactly,
yeah,
especially for Lexapro. Is that 2.5s when you have like
the
most of the
curve, yeah,
receptors?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And in Lexapro is, it's a very potent SSRI. It really translates to a lot more, potency when you compare it to citalopram
yeah.
or drugs like that. So it's also not discussed, And yeah, now I know that 2.5 is actually a really big dose, and then you have to go super slow from there. Um, so it wasn't actually until at some point I started realizing okay, so I think what happened was there was a study that came out. I want to say 2019 or 2020. It was around 2019, I think, linking benzodiazepines with dementia.
Mhm.
And that I remember seeing it on CNN or something. And I looked at it and I was like, "Oh my gosh," I read it. And at that point, I took Xanax as SOS. So
Mhm.
whenever I was feeling extremely anxious, I always
Yeah.
had it in my purse because I didn't trust myself if I went into like an anxiety or a panic attack. And I would take it a lot for flying. I had big phobia of flying that developed back when I was 15 when all of that happened.
Mhm.
So um, so I yeah, so then I was like, okay, sorry, I lost myself there. Um, Oh, so then the article on benzodiazepines came out, and I'm like, okay, I'm taking this other drug. I'm like, I'm also taking a benzo every once in a while. It's not every day, but it's every once in a while. And also, I'm taking some other class of psychiatric drug. I wonder what this drug is doing for me.
Mhm.
And I remember going to my primary care practitioner, and she told me those words came out of her mouth. She's like, there's not much as in terms of like long term side effects of Lexapro. She told me that, and that's and the truth is we don't know that there's not studies that have been long enough for people taking for certain lengths to show that. Also, I don't need a study to know that something that changes the biology of your brain, the chemistry of your brain might not be good for you long term.
Yeah.
So that study kind of sparkled something in me that I already wanted to come off even from the beginning, that to take a more serious look at it. And at the same time, I had a friend who was a health coach, and she was starting to open my eyes to a lot of just because at that time I was also on propanolol. I was in some other, prescription medications, and she started to open up my eyes to holistic healing, how leaky gut might be
Oh.
playing a part on some mental health issues, how vitamin deficiencies, how toxicities might be playing a part, how diet might be playing a part. At that time, I had a SAD diet, a standard American diet. So I ate anything under the sun, a lot of, brown foods like chicken fingers, French fries, sodas. I drank beer, I drank coffee, like my
Yeah.
input in my body wasn't really helping my brain,
Oh,
whatever was going on already.
oh, yeah.
Um, so I decided that, I wanted to start taking a better look at that. So I started to adjust my diet. I remember going to a doctor, a dermatologist, that because my hair was falling, my hair was thinning, and I was like, "What's happening?" And she was the first doctor to ever order like a B12 test,
Mhm.
and my B12 was 186. I never forget this, 186. That's extremely, extremely low. And I now I know that for people with mental health issues, we want to be at over 500, maybe in the 1,000 range. And I was at 186, and I remember looking at then, that lab and asking myself for the first time, like, okay, but why? Why is my B12 low? Okay, it can be diet, and I can adjust that. But is there anything else that I should be looking at? And that kind of started, continued to start this fuel, this whole journey of, because she said, oh, use Rogaine. and take a B12 supplement.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I can get behind the supplement, but I also want to know why
And
this is the way it is, you know?
I would say it's small intestine issues, like because the absorption of vitamin B's are disrupted if there is any dysbiosis in small intestine, and this is like
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely a part of it. I was very inflamed. If you look at pictures of me then and now, like I was overweight, my skin was different. I had this like this chronic just like cleaning my throat like chronically because I had like this drip, you know, like drip coming from my nose, just like always there. Um I had those nighttime palpitations that, by the way, once I started to level out, I was put on propanolol for the
Mhm,
nighttime palpitations and also up to my Lexapro at one point because of that. Um, and it went away once I regulated my B12, you
mhm.
know. So it's so wild that that you know that I wasn't giving directions at this point. I was 29 or 30, so I was suffering with all of this for like 15 years before I was able to start getting some real answers. Later on, I found out I also have a severe mutation on MHTFR gene. I methylate
Classic,
very poorly,
classic.
classic, methylate very poorly, and I'm like, oh, okay, I need you know, I need methylated B vitamins, and I need to take really good
It's
care of
so
my
sad that
liver.
everyone needs to figure it out on its own. Like there is no
Yeah,
guidance, there is no doctor to treat it. Like you need to figure it out on its own, and this is your basically healing journey. You need to like hit or miss, trial and error. And this is
yeah,
so sad that everyone who recovers needs to go through the same exact same issues. And
I
I'm
know.
smiling, but deep down I'm so upset that you have to go
Yeah,
through this. Yeah.
absolutely. And then and it was this friend of mine, this health coach friend of mine who opened my eyes and helped me so much more than the doctor. She helped guide me in the way of finding answers more than any doctor has ever had.
Yeah.
So so that's one of the reasons why I decided to become a health coach that specializes in brain health, that specializes in psychiatric medication to prescription, because um, we're not getting the information from our doctors. You know, I get a lot of criticism like, what are you doing in this field?
Yeah.
Um, because, you know, you're not a doctor, you're not a nurse, you're not a PA. You know, you're just a health coach. And I'm like, well, I'm here
Well,
because
you managed to
I,
overcome this, so
yeah,
this is
I'm here
the
because the doctors, they didn't give me the right advice. They gave me really bad advice that that led me to withdrawal over
of
and over
course.
again.
The
Um,
only advice can they could give you is to reestate,
yeah, reinstate, maybe add another
add another
medication, you know?
medication, or in
Yeah.
my case, it was also because I was struggling with PTSD. I was advised to take testosterone and Viagra. So this is a great,
Yeah.
great story, man.
Great. Yeah, exactly. So invalidating. There has to be another way.
Yeah, and you need to
Um,
tackle your body to restore it because it's basically dysautonomia, the autonomic dysregulation, and you need to tackle your
exactly.
body to restore it to the homeostasis level. And it's difficult. It's trial and error. There is no quick fix. Like we already thought that the pills will quick fix our problems, but they didn't. So
Yes.
when you were struggling with those symptoms, you were off the meds, or we were still tapering, or
I was still in the meds, and then it was until 2020 that again, following uh you know, not very good advice from my doctors. I was at 2.5, and I started taking every other day, which now I know is also a no-no when you're tapering. Um, and then I stopped at 2.5, and my withdrawal is a tricky one because it didn't hit until a few months later. So I had a delayed onset withdrawal.
same here. 8 months later, I started feeling weird. What the fuck? And I didn't know that it was related to the discontinuation. So same story.
That's
Eight.
even more invalidating because people, especially doctors, will be much more like much less likely to believe that this
They
is
will
withdrawal.
gaslight you instantly because oh,
Yeah.
it's recurring depression, it's recurring anxiety. You need to
Yes.
reestate and
And I don't know how it was for you, but for me, it was like unlike anything I've ever felt. Even back, and
yeah.
it was
I
unlike anything I've ever
all of a
felt.
sudden like I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't wake up. I could like stand up from bed, go to work, and I needed to reestate after 8 months post discontinuation because I couldn't handle simple tasks and
Yeah.
each reinstated push it further. So
Mhm.
What about you?
exact,
Like you started having
exactly.
withdrawals after 5 months after discontinuation, and what?
And then that was, in 2020, I had about 3 months. I started having withdrawals, and then um, I I was like, okay, what's happening? I went back to the psychiatrist, and he said, like, you need to go back at 10 milligrams. Like, instead of reinstating at 2.5, he told me to go back to the clinical dose
Mhm.
at 10 milligrams. And then I listened, and that was the last time I've ever listened to him, because I started taking the 10 milligrams again, and I remember that was the worst I've ever felt, ever. Like,
So
I
it
started
triggered
having
tingling effect, most likely.
what?
It
Yeah, it
triggered
was a
tingling
kindling
effect.
effect,
Yeah.
exactly. I started to develop like akathisia, so this sensation of being burned from your inside, like you can't like sit still, and you just
Inner
y-
restlessness. Yeah.
inner restlessness. I couldn't sleep, so then I was taking benzos to sleep because I was back
No.
on Lexapro 10 milligrams. I remember like everything felt so unreal, and I was so dissociated all the time, and it was just so incredibly wild. And so I remember thinking, at this point I was already like adjusted my diet. I was on a way to become a yoga teacher. I was
Oh.
through like my health coaching certificate. I was doing all of these changes in my life, and I remember thinking, like, this is the last time I'm taking Lexapro. I'm coming off of it. It doesn't matter what it takes. And then there was also the first time I Googled psychiatric medication withdrawal,
Mm-hmm.
and I understood what was happening to me. Um, and then I found, yeah, the Alternative to Med Center was the first thing that popped up when I searched to that, and I found a doctor that was specialized on that. She was a naturopathic doctor. She still is, Dr. Julia Britz. Um, and I met with her, and she was the first one that introduced me to hyperbolic tapering.
No. Mm-hmm.
hmm Um, and that was the beginning of my tapering journey. I also started seeing another holistic doctor called Dr. Kathy Eo. She's one of the most wonderful doctors I've ever seen. She's very holistic in the broader sense of the word, and she really helped me with detoxification with my MHGFR, and making sure that my body was at the best that it could to handle this
Mm-hmm.
taper. So I'm really incredibly grateful for both of them, because both of these expertises combined was able to take me through my taper. It took me, now I know, was even compared to other people, it's quite of a fast taper. It took me 18 months
Mm-hmm.
to taper from 10 milligrams of Lexapro. I never had problems with the bigger cuts. Like I said, I was able to go from 10 to 2.5, no problem. But then to 2.5 down, that's where, things really
Get
started
nasty.
to
Yeah.
get nasty. And I remember I tapered down to zero point 0.1 milligrams of Lexapro. I had my little syringe with me. I held on that dose for months because I was severely destabilized. February 2022 was my last dose of Lexapro at
Mm-hmm.
zero point 0.1 milligrams. And after that, it took me about 2 years to really feel like myself again. So my journey wasn't over at my last dose. In many ways was getting started, because now I didn't have the drug circulating in my blood anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on my own in a way that now I had to employ all these different tools that I had learned over the years, consistently,
Mm-hmm.
to see some progress, to see my brain, to feel my brain healing,
Yeah.
slowly. Um,
You need to have perfect routine over many months to
mm,
help your body go back
mm,
to homeostasis during the recovery, and it's extremely challenging when you are in the withdrawals and you're very unmotivated, and on top of that you need to be extremely healthy, extremely fit, and do
yeah,
all the stuff all together to help your body bounce back to the default settings. And
exactly, exactly. And that is the catch. There are many catches in this path. One of them is you need to put your body in the best position possible to handle the taper,
Yeah.
to handle this. And that means, adjusting your diet, exercising, meditating, moving, all of these things that you don't want to do because some days you just can't even get out of bed, right? You're so unmotivated. If you were like me, I had lots of suicidal ideation. I was very depressed. I was incredibly hopeless. How am I going to get out? And I like to say that, like,
So we had some technical issues, apparently, and where were we?
oh, I was saying that, um, at that time when I was going through withdrawal, I really didn't know what was, how I was showing up every day. Like, I was doing many things, but I had no motivation. Mentally I wasn't there.
Yeah,
But I just kept moving. So I don't know if it was this pure instinct of being alive. Like, I didn't know what else to do other than be alive.
survival
Um,
mode, basically.
yeah, in survival mode. But now I understand that there was this thing that I describe now as the hand of God.
Hmm.
It's interesting enough. I've been spiritual, but I've never had a good relationship with God in a way that I wouldn't talk to it or think about it or anything. And that experience brought me much closer to this concept of God, this loving presence that watches over us, and there's that connection there because it's one of the only ways I can describe. Like, I was not alone in this. There was something else carrying me as well,
Yeah.
and um, that's one of the hard things about tapering is that even though you don't feel like it, you need to show up for yourself. Um, and another one is you want to be off, you want to be done, you want to be done with this drug, but you can't rush it. So how do you how do you deal with something that it's bad for you, it's poisoning you every day, but you cannot rush your way out of this, right? That's another mindset that we need to develop during this process. It's really hard. um, and yeah, so those are two things that I was constantly dealing with, and I quickly realized that the physical plays a really important part in healing, but your nervous system, right? Like, your nervous system has been incredibly dysregulated by these drugs. It's been incredibly dysregulated by processes like kindling, going on and off the drug.
Yeah.
It's been dysregulated by the process of tapering itself,
Yeah.
which itself can be a very traumatic experience to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So working with the body and working with my support system, so connection to other people, to other like-minded people, to people that are more in a conscious journey, to people that were going through the same thing that I was going through in conscious spaces, not just in a forum, um, was incredibly important for me during this process. Also, people, what I now describe as safe people.
Yeah, you need to encounter safe people, not toxic people like myself, because when I was in withdrawal I wouldn't tell you anything positive besides we need to end our lives because of the suffering. So it's
Mm,
extremely dangerous to visit like forums because of the involuntary toxicity because of the withdrawal issues. So yeah,
Yes, exactly. And I
constant
always
looming, constant rumination about ending this. And
constant, um, and I always say, people, when we are stuck into a certain nervous system state,
yeah. Hmm.
in this process, um, especially if it's a challenging one. That's when people are most likely to research. That's when I did all my rabbit hole research. That's
Yeah.
when I was glued to the screen trying to find answers because you're just trying to feel better.
Mm-hmm.
This is when people are going to show up more in some online spaces,
Yeah.
in some unregulated spaces or spaces with like different levels of how can I say, moderation. Yeah, people will show up very vocally, and once they heal, they are enjoying life. They're
They
at a
move on.
par.
They don't come back.
Yeah, they don't come back to say, "Hey, I'm feeling so much better."
Yeah.
There are few of us that come back,
And
like
this
you
is
and
a
I.
bias, cognitive bias in this in those communities. Like, you think the only thing you think about is like long term cases. I will never gonna improve. I will never gonna get better. And
Yes.
when I follow up the long term cases, because I was very curious, how come somebody recover and somebody else don't? And in almost every long-term cases, people did some crazy stuff, like they re-stain, they switch medication, they experiment with, I don't know, other psychoactives or supplements, and they crashed basically. So the healing is possible, but oh, I think I froze. I don't know.
Yeah, might
Oh
happen again.
fuck.
Let's see.
uh just oh
Did I freeze for you, or did
no,
you just?
I just a second. You just just a moment. Okay, how about now? Just a second. um this is very okay. I think I'm back.
Okay.
Oh, we have so many technical issues
Oh,
during
it's
this
good.
podcast.
You said you can edit all of that.
Yeah, so yeah,
Okay.
so basically, uh, you need to be very cautious about visiting such forums, because you can, downward spiral with the negative thinking about ever recovering. So it's good to have
Hmm.
someone who has actually recovered and can guide you through this, yeah, like yourself. And may I ask, when you done the tapering, did you suffer from protracted withdrawal, even though you did the tapering correctly? Because I haven't. I did cold turkey, and I was instantly put into protracted withdrawal at once. So, but your case is, your story is a little bit different. So can you share with us how was it when you end up with tapering, and what was happening next?
Yeah, absolutely. So while I was tapering, my taper was compared to a lot of tapers quite smooth, for going low and slow.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't suffering too many withdrawal symptoms. They were, most of my withdrawal symptoms, by the way, they were mental. It was
Mm-hmm.
worse than anxiety and depression. Depression was one of the worst. Also, I was going through other things in my life. I had a breakup. I was just, suddenly realizing, and that's again another thing in this process, that I call the death and rebirth of the tapering process is,
Mm-hmm.
I was going through the death of my old life,
Yeah.
who I was until that point, who I liked, what I liked, and what I disliked. I was a overworker. I was in a corporate setting. I was doing something
Mm-hmm.
that was very much not in tune with my emotions, not in tune with my creativity. Very, now I know, very masculine energy driven.
Mm-hmm.
I was a people pleaser. I was an overachiever, right?
Yeah.
I was all of these things that now I didn't make sense. My body couldn't hold anymore. I was longing for softness, for flowiness, for creativity, to get in touch with my femininity, and changing my entire career, my entire life. And I was face to face with that. So I was going through that death. I used to be all of these things, like accomplishing awards in my career and like doing long distance hiking and
Mm.
all of that. And
Nice.
all of a sudden, like I can't walk more than 20 minutes. And I don't, yeah, I don't have the motivation to achieve anything else other than being. So anyways, I was going through this death and rebirth that definitely contributed to the anxiety and the depression that I was feeling. once I was off, I suffered with severe anhedonia, which is just the lack of feelings,
Oh.
lack of emotions, just feeling flat and numb. And
So it
um,
was in the protracted withdrawal when we were
I
off.
was in protracted, and I believe I was in protracted for about 2 years. Not that was like a nightmare for 2 years. I definitely had ups and downs
Hmm.
still, especially if they were life triggered. So during that time, I had another breakup. I had COVID. My cat
Yeah.
died. Right. A lot of these things will, again, when we're in protracted withdrawal, we can call it a wave. It will
Stress
trigger a
tolerance
wave
is very disrupted. Like every stressor in your life is pushing you to the max.
to the max,
Yeah.
and that's something too. Like if I wasn't, my brain wasn't dealing with this rebalancing its chemistry because of 7 years of taking Lexapro, maybe I had taken these life events differently, maybe, but now I know there's just like this added layer that all of us that are in withdrawal and protected withdrawal need to deal with. It's this added layer of this regulation. Being a woman, and we have another layer of our cycles too.
Yeah, it. I
Every
think
month.
the withdrawal is different for women than for men because of the hormonal cycle, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's even.
So one of the things that I explored today is cycle syncing your taper. How can you taper according to your cycle so that you have a better chance to succeed in your taper? Because if you're tapering every month and you're cycling every month, then your hormones, your sexual hormones, also have a big role in the production of certain
Yeah.
neurotransmitters. We need to be cycle syncing that taper because that will give you more sense, more chance of
Hmm.
success.
And may I ask you, did you also suffered from PSSD during that time, or you didn't have that symptom? Did it resolve? Like how was it with that part of the? Because it's very actually common among people
It
tapering
is
or in protracted.
withdrawal. Yeah, I did not have PSSD. I remember once I started remember like back when the last time I took the Lexapro, like from 2.5 milligrams, I was off, protected withdrawal, went back on 10 milligrams,
Hmm.
the worst mistake I've ever done. Um, that time I lost completely my sex drive, my libido. It was completely gone.
Hmm.
And then it kind of returned, and that's like a good point too, because I feel like working with the sexual energy through taper, that's something that I did
Hmm.
consciously. I entered tantric spaces, I entered sex positive spaces, I entered a conscious relationship where we were approaching sexuality through this conscious lens,
Hmm.
was incredibly pivotal and important for me to continue to make those brain connections, and let them be alive throughout my taper and then after my taper.
So that's how you try to reconnect your sexuality for this tantra stuff and
Yes,
okay.
and that's been part of my big part of my research these days. So if you go on my website, I have a
Mhm.
tab called My Expertise, and then you see that like the conscious relating and positive sexuality and conscious sexuality is the beefiest one. I just like it's one of my areas of expertise because it was through sexual energy activation,
Yeah,
which is your main life force energy,
yeah,
that I was able to counteract a lot of withdrawal symptoms. And it's
yeah.
something too that's not talked about because withdrawal is taboo. Coming off of medication is taboo.
PSSD is taboo. Everything is taboo here, and
Oozing conscious sexuality and self pleasure to heal from withdrawal is like extra taboo.
yeah, of
It's like
course.
taboo on top of taboo, top of taboo. So, anyways, I love that. I love this. This,
But
and
you've
it's
got the point here. I mean, like restoring your sexuality is basically restoring your drive for life. Because
mm,
without sexuality, how can we achieve anything when you don't chase this ultimate pleasure? Like, and
yeah.
restoring that also restore everything else, like your cognition, your emotions, because it's all connected. So I think
Well,
you've got the point. Like, and,
exactly. And I think that was one of the key factors um, of me not developing PSSD, because of that, But again, I think there are other factors too. When I was working with free range psychiatry and
mhm,
closely with Dr. Kendra Campbell, she once told me that a lot of her PSSD clients, especially women, had had some sort of traumatic sexual event in the past. And that was like a good indicator or like almost like a yeah, like a pre-existing thing that could increase the chance that someone would develop PSSD during the tapering process.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, so I think this is like such a key like part of this process is working with your sexual energy.
Mm-hmm.
Different ways to do that, and also it's important to bring consciousness to it because when we are taper, when we are in the withdrawal, we're very vulnerable, and we're vulnerable to um, maybe like engaging in sexual activity that it's not really nourishing for us,
Yeah.
or just avoiding it altogether.
Mhm.
So I love to foster these kind of conversations, practices with people
Yeah.
that are willing to learn and go in this route, how you can use this consciously to
Yeah.
heal.
Yeah, of course. In protracted withdrawal, you do things like randomly sometimes. Like you don't know what you're doing, but you're doing this anyway, and becoming
Hmm.
extremely cautious about things that are helping, benefiting you, and avoiding things that are harming you in the process is also part of the journey to learn it.
Yeah.
Like for instance, avoiding caffeine intake because it can crush you even even though if it was safe before. Since you are in protracted, you have to avoid, like you have to be extremely cautious about taking any stuff
Yes.
that can affect your nervous system.
Absolutely. And that's why too, the more I healed, I understood. I was like, okay, the diet is important, like, right,
Yeah,
caffeine, alcohol, drugs, sugars, whatever, like things that you're been putting in your body, yes, it
yeah,
make a really huge. But
sure.
at one point, I think a lot of us hit this point where we're like, I'm doing everything, but I'm not healing. I'm stuck, right? I'm hitting a wall, but I'm doing everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to the sauna and you wear my blue blocking glasses.
And if you go into details, it turns out that he's intoxicating with sugar or smoking cigarettes or don't do any physical activity. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that's your experience as well, but every time if somebody tells me in the withdrawal that, oh, I'm doing everything to restore it, but I'm stuck. And if I ask you into details, okay, so you don't doing this, don't treating your guts well, you don't you actually eat sugar because even though if you eat like dark chocolate and it's 70%, it still contains sugar. But we need to put down inflammation. We need to do every like observe every aspect of your bodily function to help it to restore it, and then the healing happening. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, if you intoxicate your body literally say, "Fuck you! I don't want you to put anything toxic into the system anymore."
Yeah, the body might get exactly like there's some of the details that matter, right? Like um yeah, like some small habits that can like really, and I think that caffeine, the alcohol are like
Yeah,
two like of the big ones that can cause severe
of
dysregulation.
course.
And then also like your eating habits, right? Like, are you eating to support your blood sugar? Because getting to that blood sugar roller coaster is definitely one of the things that your
Mhm.
brain feeds on glucose. So if you are having these ups and downs, like
Yeah,
inevitably you will trigger yourself into a fight or flight mode,
yeah.
just by just
The
by
glucose
that.
spikes. Yeah, that's why like when I work with my clients, I always advise to go into keto
Yeah.
and
Keto.
maintain for like few months to see how it happens. And it also has the healing properties, the autophagy increase, the BDNF increase. So it's a
Exactly.
long and challenging process, and changing your diet habits, it's
It's
extremely
so
difficult. Yeah,
yeah.
and
But then with people that are just feeling like they're doing so much on the physical level, that's when, I hit the wall too. I'm like, I'm doing everything. and it became clear to me that I need to just start working with my nervous system, that I
Mhm,
needed to start doing somatic work. I needed to understand better where I was stuck in some of these survival patterns, either if it's fight or fly or freeze or shut down, and really doing work with my emotions. I was finally off the drug. I
mhm,
was finally in a place where I could deeply feel and process. um, Sometimes people, in taking medications or going to therapy for years and years and years, they don't feel like they have a breakthrough or they have
mhm.
the resolution of anything. That's because the medication is keeping you from accessing deep healing through numbness,
Of-
numbing you from accessing these deep
You
emotions.
cannot heal if you numb your emotions with drugs, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, And
So the more you heal, so then the more you go down the drug, the more access you have to your emotional range, which can be overwhelming, especially if we are used to numbing.
yeah,
Now, not only you have to deal with all of the things that you didn't heal before, all these years that you're in the drug because you couldn't access it. Now you're dealing with them. Plus, you're dealing with the increased emotional range. Okay, now are really likely to pathologize ourselves and say, I'm having mood swings, I'm
yeah.
having a neuro emotion,
I have
whatever it
a
is.
condition, mental issues, because I have ups and downs, and I need to regulate it with drugs because I can't handle myself, basically. Yeah.
Exactly,
But this is
exactly.
life. You need to deal with this, man. I mean, it's
So
tough,
now
but
you have to
there is
learn
no
how to
other way.
feel.
You can take drugs, but in the end, everyone ends up with either addiction or protracted withdrawal or other issues.
Yeah.
And for me, the most like I'm curious about your opinion, but for me, the most challenging thing when I work with my clients is to actually convince them that this is not permanent and they're gonna improve. Because when you are in this fight or flight mode and when you are in the severe withdrawals, you basically think that okay, I'm done, and days passing by and I'm not improving. And how if I may ask, like, how are you managing to convince them that they're gonna actually improve or recover? Because
Yeah.
it's extremely challenging for me when I work with my client. I don't know about
Mm,
your opinion about this issue.
yeah, absolutely. So my approach is that I don't convince them because
Yeah,
being to having be at the bottom
yeah,
of the hole of I am never going to heal anymore. I broke my brain. I am the one
yeah,
that never heals. That is part of the journey
yeah.
of actually overcoming it. That's when you know that
But
you
that's
need to.
what they don't want to hear this.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, so what I do is I sit with them in the sheer fear.
Yeah,
I sit with them in the fear that this might be like this forever.
yeah,
So, what it is to access this deep, deep fear of my life is ruined, right? It's a fear that most of us have, a fear of dying alone, a fear of being a burden, a fear of not being able to take care of ourselves. It's one of the deepest seated fears in humanity.
yeah.
So, I just sit with them in that fear. I help them access this fear. Turns out when they access the fear, in this raw state, with in a place where like it's okay to feel this, it's okay to be here. They find the next door to move from there.
Mm-hmm,
Because what happens is when we are constantly denying your reality, that is where a lot of suffering comes from.
mm-hmm.
But me, I encourage them, make it bigger, make it bigger. Let's let this fear grow. Watch it grow. What is it saying to you? How does it feel? And that's when they access that and they are able to access other doors.
But
Um, w-
But on
my
the other
goal.
hand, they are not themselves at that exact state because it
Mhm.
isn't them. They are just have crazy thoughts in endless loop ruminations, and this is not them. It's basically the withdrawal. So it's like
It's it's my belief that the loops are caused by unfinished emotions, incomplete emotions. So when we are not allowing ourselves to complete the emotions, to feel the deepest depths of fear, to feel the deepest sets of sadness and anger, when you don't allow to complete these loops, the brain will continue to go around loops
endlessly
and loops and
until
loops.
it's resolved. Yeah, and it's a
And
basically physiological process in healthy people, but
yeah.
when you are in withdrawal, it's even further.
It's pronounced. It's incredibly pronounced.
Yeah,
But that's the way. Once we start not to fear our emotions anymore, that we can feel things deeply and be okay.
yeah,
That is just one of the keys
yeah.
that I'm like, no matter what happens, I will be able to navigate through
Yeah.
this.
And this is one case. There is also different case when people don't feel anything. I was at that case. I didn't feel shit.
Yes,
Like I couldn't enjoy anything. I couldn't
me too.
get any pleasure response from reading. I'm not saying talking about sex. I'm talking about watching a movie, reading a book, walking outside, anything. So this is something. It's also difficult to address. That okay, man, you're gonna enjoy it at some point, but they don't believe that.
Exactly, exactly. And it's holding that space for them. It's also, I think, holding space, y- like a collective space. Like one of the most healing things that I've done is to create a support group where I'm not the only one telling them. I have 3 to 4 people telling them like it gets better. Do not give up. We're here with you. I know how it is to be in the deepest depths. Like they might not believe you, one individual,
Yeah,
but they might be more likely to feel held and supported
yeah.
in a group setting. So I think that's one of the most important things, that I've done too, is to create a community, of people. That's
Yeah, community is a great place, and
mm,
reassurance is the best tool, I think, in my
mm,
expertise to approach this, to reassure them that it's gonna get better, you're gonna overcome this. They need to just hear them all over again many
yeah,
times. They sometimes, my clients text me, "Is it gonna get better?" And I'm just replying, "Yes, it will." And
yeah,
this is also brings them peace that they need to trust the
yes,
process. There is have a blind faith, have a leap of hope, and otherwise
yes.
if you're stuck in this permanent mode, you're not gonna make it. And I was also so close to give up on my life because I was
Mm,
convinced that this is the end, but hopefully it was not.
yeah. That's why I think one of the most important practices, and you just mentioned this, was um, cultivating faith, right?
Mhm.
When we are in these deepest depths, that's when we a lot of times open up to spirituality, to something greater than ourselves.
Yeah,
What's the meaning of all these suffering? Is there a meaning? Am I going to make it through? You need to start believing into something that's greater than you in order to make it.
yeah,
So that's when I've seen one of the biggest spiritual breakthroughs in myself and my clients, and
yeah,
it's difficult that we have to go through that sometimes to create this strength and bond with the unseen. But I think it's what a lot of times ended up carrying people through this
yeah.
process.
And I vote for this because when I was at my lowest, I was actually I remember that the day when I was hitting my head with fists and I was yelling, "Please God help me!" I'm an atheist, but I the only thing I can turn to was God
Mm.
to maintain this, and it was just automatic,
Yes.
unconscious reaction, subconscious reaction that I was
Yeah.
screaming, "Somebody help me!" because I can't handle this anymore, and it
Exactly.
was, yeah, but
Exactly.
when I started recovering, actually spirituality actually decreased, to be honest, and I'm still
Yeah, and everyone goes through a different path. Absolutely, everyone goes through a different path, and it's
yeah, of course.
another thing here is there's no right or wrong. You find out that no two tapers are alike, no two journeys are alike.
And stop
Um,
comparing, people, please stop
Stop
comparing,
comparing.
because this is
Yeah.
very, everyone is asking how long is gonna take. My symptoms are that you did reassess, you took different medication, you did this, you did that, and I say, man, it doesn't mean that you're gonna heal. You won't heal within next year. Just because it took me 6 years to overcome, it doesn't mean that you're gonna suffer for the same time. So
Hmm.
but it's to be expected that people compare each other because they want to be the lucky one in the process. But
Yeah.
there is,
It's normal. We're social creatures. We're constantly looking around us to see, where we at in comparison to the whole. We don't want to be left behind. It's just this hardwired thing for survival
of
within
course,
us. So it's normal. We're social creatures. But the thing is, this is such an individualized process. Everyone there have their own sets of traumas, genetics, environment, conditions, and also ability, like money too. Not everyone has access to all of these different healing modalities or compounding or supplements or whatever.
yeah,
So that even puts people in like really different categories in terms of like how much they can heal. And so it's normal, but it's one of the main things is to drop the comparison, because even if you decide to taper at two different times of your life, these two tapers can be
totally
very
different, of
different.
course.
So dropping the comparison, dropping the timeline. When will I feel better? I've already been like this for 1 month, for 2 months, for 1 year, for 2 years. It's really hard to drop the timeline, but it's been one of the things that being the biggest shift in the mindset is just it takes how long it takes,
yeah,
and I'm gonna go on my own pace.
yeah.
And I'm not wrong
Very
for
percent.
taking however it takes. Yeah.
And sometimes people need to choose between maintaining a job and starting the healing process, because doing both is extremely
Many
difficult.
times.
Yeah, and
Many
it's
times.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So there's many times where people have to go back in with their parents or move, with like other
yeah.
people that support
Need to
them,
go,
quit their
need
jobs. Yeah.
to few steps back to actually make a step forward with the
Yeah.
recovery, and that's what
And
happened
it's at
in my
that
case.
time, yeah, where they might figure it out like, well, actually, I didn't like my job anyways. I actually want to do something else. Is at that time they also might realize that they need to
That
take a
my life
different route.
actually wasn't that good after all, and I was
Yes.
dragging myself up to maintain this job,
Main.
or yeah,
Exactly. So I always say you're not healing to go back to who you were.
yeah. You're
You're healing for
rebuilding
something
yourself, building
greater.
your new self,
Yes.
and you need to let
Yeah.
the past go. And
And they ask me like, "Will I go back to who I was?" And
no,
I always say, "No,
no.
you won't. It will be better.
Yeah,
It will be better."
I was fighting with this for many years. I was begging, please, I want to be my old self. And but
Yeah.
when I recovered, I realized, okay, I don't want to be myself, old self, the anxious guy, the
Yeah.
19-year-old who was shy and all this stuff. And I'm a
Yeah.
better version of myself after this journey. And I wish this to everyone, that you need to accept that it's gonna change you for the
It's
better, but only when you survive this and manage to
that
overcome this. Yeah,
And it's because this process it forces you to look at everything you haven't looked up until this point.
yeah,
It forces you to look at your traumas, how you're coping with the traumas. It forces you to look at all these different
yeah.
limiting beliefs that you might have about yourself, about
You
the
get
world,
new
about life,
perspective for everything, for with your relations with your parents, with your friends, with
everything. Yeah.
everything.
Yes.
Yeah,
So for that reason it takes you higher than you were before.
yeah,
And there's so much hope for something greater, for a total different life. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was very informative and
Yeah.
informative podcast, Emily. I really enjoyed it, and
Me too.
thank you
Thank you so much.
for
Yeah,
joining.
absolutely.
And I hope that people can benefit from this podcast and apply things we talked about in their lives to get better. And I wish
Absolutely.
them quick recovery from this iatrogenic injury that nobody expected happen.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And then knowing that, they're not alone. There are people that have been through this process or going through this process. And yeah, never hesitate to, ask for help,
yeah,
to share your struggles, to find your safe people. There are many of us creating these spaces out there,
yeah,
and we just
yeah.
waiting for you to join us.
Yeah, having a safe space is crucial for maintaining
Mm,
this, not being alone in this process. And
mm,
I
mm.
wish I knew better when I was in my journey, but
Yeah,
now we know better, and now we can help
mm,
others overcome this
exactly,
situation.
exactly.
Okay,
Wonderful.
yeah. I'm gonna make a cut here. Blah blah blah.
Uh-huh.
I can.
Good.
I'm not.